I'm Mike Curtin. I'm a retired newspaperman and a former state representative. And in both of those capacities, for more than 4 decades, I tried to be, and still try to be, a student of our electoral politics and campaign finance. Over all those years, I came to appreciate that the attempt to make electoral politics and campaign finance more transparent and more accountable is a never-ending challenge. There is always more to do. Well over a century ago, in the 1907 race for mayor, before we had a city charter, the 2 candidates spent considerable energy arguing over which candidate was more beholden to the big brewing companies and the utilities. And the brewers and utilities were pretty influential back then. The following year, in 1908, the Ohio General Assembly, for the first time, passed a state law prohibiting corporations from using corporate money or property to support a political party, committee, or candidate. 2 years later, in 1910, Congress passed the first act requiring disclosure of campaign contributions for the U.S. House. In the next decade, the 1920s, the Ohio General Assembly outlawed any type of corporate support for political committees, direct or indirect. Fast forward a half century in the wake of the Watergate scandals. In 1974, the Ohio General Assembly approved a law establishing campaign spending limits for all candidates, for governor all the way down to village and township offices. But the law had no effect on home rule municipalities like Columbus and its sister cities. 2 years later, in 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down expenditure limits in federal campaigns as a limitation on free speech. That prompted Ohio and other states to repeal their own spending limits to conform with that Buckley versus Vallejo opinion. Because of that Supreme Court ruling and subsequent rulings that have equated campaign spending with free speech, all of our state and local efforts to improve transparency and accountability have been focused on the contribution side, on limiting contributions rather than expenditures, and on improving reporting requirements so citizens can more easily follow the money. In 1987, the General Assembly passed bipartisan legislation allowing corporations back in the ballgame, at least to operate PACs, as long as employee donations to them were voluntary. In 1995, Governor Voinovich signed bipartisan legislation establishing statewide contribution limits, limiting the amounts that individuals, PACs, and campaign committees can give to state candidates. The contribution matrix was linked to inflation, and that is the same framework we have in state law today. 1 year prior to that, in the election of November 1994, during the administration of Mayor Greg Lashutka, Columbus voters approved a charter amendment that for the first time allowed the city to regulate campaign contributions. That amendment, approved by a 2/3 vote, anticipated that the day would come when we would want to limit campaign contributions in Columbus municipal races. 20 years later, in November 2014, Columbus voters approved a package of charter amendments, each with more than 70% of the vote, to add disclosure requirements and ballot issues to the current authority of council to regulate campaign finance. I had the privilege, along with City Auditor Hugh Doring at that time, of being one of the 5 members of that Charter Review Commission that recommended those 2014 amendments. I provide this capsule history not to be a long-winded former state legislator, but to make the essential point that our collective efforts to improve our system of electoral politics and campaign finance are never done. There's always more to do, especially now in light of the 2010 Citizens United case allowing the explosion of dark money in our campaigns across the land. That's why I'm happy to be here this afternoon to introduce Mayor Andrew Ginther, who will introduce his administration's plan to continue this historic work. Thank you. Mayor Ginther.
Thank you, Mike, and I always feel like we ought to be paying admission to lectures and talks given by Mike Curtin from a historical perspective. Great journalist, a great reporter, and someone that understands our history better than most. I want to thank our city attorney, Zach Klein, our city auditor, Megan Kilgore. We're going to hear from council members here today, but particularly President Hardin, Pro Tem Cinziano, Councilmember Remy, and my president, Nana Watson of the NAACP. Nana, thank you for being here. Robert Kennedy said, all of us might wish at times that we lived in a more tranquil world, but we don't. And if our times are difficult and perplexing, so are they challenging and filled with opportunity. We can never forget that we live in a great country, a great city, and that is made so by our people. We are built on the principle of fairness and opportunity, and we must do all that we can to protect that. Right now, our democracy is faced with the challenge of dark money, political money, hidden from disclosure, a secret to the people of this community and communities across our country. After the 2010 Citizens United ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, underground money contributions were legal and untraceable. Seattle and Austin, two great American cities, saw dramatic increases in dark money due in part to their contribution limits. The 2018 election cycle, more than $1 billion in dark money was spent to influence elections in America. Think about that for a second, $1 billion. We don't know where it came from and what their interests were, potentially foreign or domestic. That's according to the Center for Responsive Politics, a 26% increase from the previous election cycle. It is critical that our elections are decided by the people, not by secretive dark money dollars. And if Columbus is going to remain a model city built on data and evidence best practices, we cannot afford to wait for the state or federal government to address the issue of dark money that is undermining elections across the country. The time for reform is now. Earlier this year, myself, Council President Hardin, City Attorney Klein, directed city staff to research and recommend regulation of dark money, as well as the city's first limits on the amounts and sources of campaign contributions. Following the September 18, 2018 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that allows disclosure of dark money, we knew the time was right to move ahead with our proposed changes. The ruling allows the city to institute contribution limits and dark money disclosure, which will make it less likely that money will be able to flow underground out of the public discourse. Today, we are announcing proposed legislation that will change our city code, bring dark money into the light, and carry on our record of sweeping, comprehensive ethics laws and the most frequent, timely, and transparent disclosure of campaign spending for any city in Ohio. Highlights to these proposed changes include limiting annual contributions to municipal candidates by following the state law contribution amounts of $12,707.79, creating new cutting-edge dark money disclosure by requiring anyone issuing an election period communication, anyone trying to influence our elections, They have to immediately disclose their contributions, their expenditures, and their debts. Continuing to require more campaign finance disclosure than state law currently requires. We're requiring the most disclosure of any large city in Ohio. We're requiring the auditing of all campaign finance filings to assure compliance with campaign finance laws. And we're creating a system to protect and investigate alleged violations of the new city code. We also are trying to increase folks who are participating in the process, folks at all different resource levels, by allowing a non-refundable municipal tax credit of $50 per individual and $100 per joint filer if they file a city tax return, mirroring similar state law for state candidates. I will say it again because it bears repeating. These are cutting-edge changes for the city of Columbus. The first time in 104 years since the charter first took shape. It is the first time we have had campaign contribution limits in the city's history. It is absolutely critical for our residents to have trust in the election of municipal leaders and the issues that they're voting on affecting the future of our great city. It can only happen when we have maximum transparency and reasonable limits that don't drive political money, influencing policies, priorities, agendas, and officials underground. That is one of the greatest threats to the quality of life of this city, and I believe democracy in this country. I am grateful to everyone for their hard work on these changes. It is now my pleasure to introduce the President of Columbus City Council, President Shannon Hardin.
Well, good afternoon. I want to thank Mayor Ginther for his leadership and for bringing this forward and for the collaboration. I want to thank City Attorney Zach Klein. This proposal was reviewed and improved based on the input from the City Attorney and his team. So thank you to the City Attorney's Office. I'd like to recognize my colleagues, Councilmember Jiza Page, Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, and President Pro Tem Mike Cinziano, who are here with us today. The new era of dark money is no good for democracy, and it's no good for Columbus. We know that, and our residents know that. That's why I'm standing here with Mayor Ginther and community partners to announce this reform to the city's campaign finance system. Transparency and accountability are critical to our ability to continue building a strong city. If someone or something is on your ballot, you should be able to know who is putting dollars on the table in that race. It's that simple. We've seen dark money infiltrate our local elections, even trying to flip local school levies. The mayor and I have discussed this issue over the years, and just as we work to change the structure of council this year, now we are looking to put in place some best practices on campaign finance reform. As we thought about how we would bring this before the public and have the conversation with the community and ultimately pass this historic legislation, I thought of my colleague, President Pro Tem Cinziano, and the work that he did as the former director of the Board of Elections. And I thought if anybody could help bring this across the finish line from our legislative side, it'd be President Pro Tem. So with that, President Pro Tem Cinziano.
Well, I thought Council President Hardin was going to give my entire bio there. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Council President Hardin. Thank you, Mayor Ginther, for your ongoing work on this important issue. In my 2 years, 10 months, 28 days on council, the work of the Charter Review Committee has loomed large, and this piece, campaign finance reform, has served as a piece of that discussion. What more can we do? And the administration's effort to really have that dark money addressed. As the mayor mentioned, bring light to that area is important. And so very proud of the work we're going to do on the council side to have a presentation on December 4th at 6 p.m. for our public hearing on this ordinance, but also to hear feedback from the community. We recognize, as Council President said, as former Director of Board of Elections, our election process is critical. We want it to be free, fair, and open. And campaign finance reform and campaign finance in general is a part of that process. And so this ordinance is a big change. It's another transformative piece of legislation in collaboration with the administration, and very proud of the work of my colleagues on council. So looking forward to our further discussions, further effort, and really appreciate everyone's work to get us to this point. And again, a public hearing December 4th at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Our commitment is truly united in this effort, and the feedback that we're going to receive will continue to help guide what we do. The goal is to have something in place for our municipal city elections in January of 2019. So we got a nice window here, but enjoy that effort. And again, as you've heard, the city attorney, the mayor's administration, council president's office have been having many discussions to land us to this point. So those are my brief comments. Now I get the honor of introducing our president from the NAACP, Nana Watson.
Good afternoon. I'm Nana Watson. I bring you greetings from the oldest and the boldest civil rights organization. I always like to say that. Thank you, Mayor, for always including the NAACP in planning, sharing information with us prior to implementation. That means a whole lot to the NAACP, and I just can't say thank you enough. Campaign finance reform is a topic that should have great importance to every community, as it is especially important to the African American community. What you have proposed, Mayor, and your staff will not only keep the voter informed on who is supporting a particular candidate, but more importantly, it will do away with what is referred to as dark money. With this much-needed change in place, we might see the return to old-fashioned campaigning, knocking on doors, telephoning people. That's what I believe in the NAACP will cause this to occur. Again, thank you for the time invested and the bipartisan approach in beginning the process of reforming campaign finances in our city. Let the leveling of the campaign playing ground begin now. Your NAACP will be encouraging the community to participate in the hearings that will take place. Again, thank you and much love to you and your staff.